Something about this didn't just feel unusual, it felt premature. On live television, without being asked a single direct question, Melania Trump suddenly stepped forward and firmly denied any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. No reporter had pushed her. No breaking headline had forced a response. There was no immediate accusation demanding clarification. And yet, she addressed it anyway, directly, confidently, and ahead of any public pressure. That's the moment people started paying closer attention. Because in situations like this, timing isn't just important, it's everything. People don't usually rush to deny something that hasn't been brought up, unless they believe it's about to be. And then, just days later, something quietly surfaced that changed how that moment was being viewed. Not a rumor, not a viral tweet, but an official record pointing toward a version of events that didn't fully line up with what had just been said publicly. A different account. A different origin story. And suddenly, what looked like a simple denial started to feel like the beginning of something much bigger. Now the question wasn't just what she said, it was why she said it first. Because when timelines don't match, when statements come before questions, and when separate pieces of information start pointing in different directions, people begin to ask harder questions. And once those questions start, they don't stop. This isn't about speculation or internet noise. This is about sequence, timing, and documented details that, when placed side by side, create a picture that feels increasingly difficult to ignore. Because sometimes the most revealing moment in a story isn't what gets exposed later, it's what someone chooses to say too early. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to look at what happened right before it, because the timing wasn't random, and when you lay the events out in order, the situation starts to feel a lot less coincidental. Just one day before that unexpected statement, a name most people had never even heard before suddenly appeared online, Amanda Angaro. And what she posted wasn't vague, wasn't subtle, and definitely wasn't accidental. She went directly after Melania Trump with statements that sounded more like warnings than opinions, saying things like she knew who Melania really was, hinting at deeper connections, and even suggesting she had information that could expose something much bigger. These weren't random internet trolls throwing guesses around, these were targeted messages, written with intent, and posted publicly for everyone to see. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. According to her own claims, Amanda wasn't just another outsider looking in. She said she had known Melania for years, decades, even, and that alone raises questions about proximity. But it doesn't stop there. Her past places her uncomfortably close to the same world that Epstein operated in. As a teenager, she reportedly boarded Epstein's private jet, the same aircraft that has been tied to countless investigations and testimonies over the years. She described being surrounded by extremely young girls, many underage, and encountering Ghislaine Maxwell, who is now serving a prison sentence for her role in trafficking. This isn't speculation, this is her own account of events that place her directly inside that network at a very early age. And then, just as quickly as those posts appeared, they were gone. Deleted. No follow-up. No explanation. No clarification. Just silence. That alone might not prove anything, but the sequence is what makes it hard to ignore. A woman with alleged ties to Epstein's world posts direct, aggressive messages aimed at Melania. The posts disappear. And then, within 24 hours, Melania steps in front of cameras and denies any connection to Epstein without being asked. That's not a normal media cycle. That's not how these situations usually unfold. Because typically, a public denial comes after pressure builds, after headlines form, after questions are raised, after accusations gain traction. But here, the denial came first, almost like a response to something that hadn't fully surfaced yet. And when you look at it that way, the timeline stops feeling like coincidence and starts feeling like reaction. Not to the public, but to something happening just beneath the surface. Now the story isn't just about what was said on camera. It's about what triggered it. Because when a statement comes out of nowhere, and it lines up perfectly with something that just disappeared hours earlier, people start wondering if those two things were ever really separate in the first place. Now this is where the story stops being about isolated moments and starts looking like a network. Because once you follow the timeline, one name keeps appearing over and over again, a name that quietly sits at the center of multiple connections: Paolo Zampolli. At first glance, he doesn't seem controversial. He's known as a modeling agent, a businessman, someone who helped bring talent into the United States. But when you look closer, his role becomes far more significant, because he's directly linked to how Melania Trump entered Donald Trump's world. According to widely accepted accounts, it was Zampolli who discovered Melania in Europe, helped facilitate her move to the US, and most importantly, introduced her to Donald Trump at a party in New York in 1998. That alone makes him a key figure in her story. But here's where things start to overlap in a way that's hard to ignore, because Zampoli's name doesn't just appear in Melania's timeline. It also shows up in records connected to Jeffrey Epstein. Documents and reports have placed Zampolli in business discussions involving modeling agencies that Epstein was also interested in. The modeling world at that time, especially in cities like New York and Paris, was one of the environments where multiple powerful figures, including Epstein, operated behind the scenes. And when you realize that Amanda Angaro, the same woman who posted those messages, also had a long-term connection with Zampolli, the lines start crossing in ways that feel less accidental. Now you have one individual linking Melania's early career, Epstein's business interests, and a model who claims to have been inside that same network as a teenager. And it doesn't end in the past. As of recent years, Zampolli hasn't faded into the background. He's remained connected to powerful circles, even holding diplomatic roles linked to Trump's administration. So now you're looking at someone who bridges multiple timelines: the 1990s modeling industry, Epstein-era connections, and present-day political proximity. That's not a loose connection, that's continuity. So when people ask why Melania's statement felt sudden, this is part of the reason. Because once you start mapping these relationships, the story isn't just about whether she knew Epstein directly. It becomes about the environment, the shared circles, and the individuals who moved between them. And when one person sits at the intersection of all those paths, it forces a different kind of question, not just if connections existed, but how close those worlds actually were. At this point, the story isn't built on a single claim or a single moment anymore. It's built on overlapping relationships that all lead back to the same place. And once those overlaps become visible, the earlier denial doesn't feel random, it feels like it was made before people had the chance to connect these dots themselves. Up until this point, everything could still be argued as coincidence, overlap, or interpretation. But then comes the part that shifts the entire conversation, because now we are not talking about social media posts or indirect connections anymore, we are talking about an official record. After Melania Trump publicly stated that she met Donald Trump by chance at a New York party in 1998, a resurfaced FBI witness document introduced a completely different version of that same moment. According to that record, a witness connected to Jeffrey Epstein claimed that Epstein himself played a role in introducing Melania to Trump. And just like that, the story splits into multiple versions, all describing the same event, but none of them fully aligning. Now you have three different narratives existing at the same time. Melania says it happened randomly at a party. Paolo Zampolli has publicly claimed that he was the one who made the introduction. And then there's the FBI-linked witness account suggesting Epstein's involvement. Three separate explanations, one shared moment, and only one of them can be completely accurate. That's where the discomfort starts to grow. Because when basic facts like how two people met begin to conflict across sources, it raises a much bigger issue. If something that simple can't be pinned down clearly, what else might not line up? And it doesn't stop at just that introduction. That same set of records also places Epstein in proximity to the modeling industry spaces connected to Zampoli, environments where young models were being discovered, managed, and moved internationally. Again, none of this directly proves wrongdoing by Melania herself, but it reinforces how tightly connected these circles were during that period. It shows that the same names weren't operating in isolation, they were crossing paths, sharing spaces, and appearing in overlapping timelines. So now, when you go back to that original moment, the unexpected denial on live television, it starts to feel different. Because it didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened just before these contradictions began gaining attention again. And that's what makes people pause. Not because of one document alone, but because of what happens when that document is placed next to everything else, the timeline, the connections, the statements, and the sudden need to address something that hadn't yet become a headline. At this stage, the story isn't about proving one version right or wrong. It's about the fact that multiple versions exist, and they don't agree. And when that happens in a case tied to figures as controversial as Epstein, even small inconsistencies start carrying a lot more weight. Because once a timeline cracks in one place, people start looking for where else it might break. At this point, you might expect the story to quiet down, statements made, timelines debated, and attention slowly fading. But that's not what happened. Instead, the pressure seemed to move behind the scenes, and that's where things took another turn. Because when author Michael Wolff began publicly discussing possible links between Melania Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, the response wasn't a simple denial or clarification. It escalated into something much more aggressive. Reports surfaced that legal action was being prepared at an extraordinary level, including the threat of a massive lawsuit, reportedly reaching into the hundreds of millions, even approaching $1 billion scale. That kind of response doesn't just shut down a conversation, it amplifies it. Because when stakes get that high, people stop asking what was said and start asking why such a strong reaction was necessary in the first place. But here's where it gets even more unusual. Instead of backing down, Wolff didn't wait for the legal pressure to fully land, he moved first. He invoked legal protections designed specifically for situations like this, where powerful figures attempt to silence claims through intimidation rather than direct courtroom resolution. In simple terms, he flipped the script. Rather than being forced into defense, he challenged the pressure itself, turning what could have been a quiet legal threat into a very public battle over information, speech, and control of the narrative. And once that happened, the story didn't shrink, it expanded. Wolff also claimed something that added another layer to the situation, that he had conducted extensive recorded conversations with Epstein himself, hours of material that, according to him, had yet to be fully explored publicly. Now whether those recordings contain anything directly relevant is a separate question, but the mere existence of them keeps the conversation alive. Because now it's not just about past documents or conflicting timelines, it's about the possibility that more information could still surface. And then came the public reaction. Thousands of people began supporting his legal fight, contributing funds and attention, turning what might have stayed a niche controversy into something much larger. Because once a story crosses that line, from private dispute to public confrontation, it becomes harder to control. Every attempt to suppress it ends up feeding it. Every denial gets re-examined. Every contradiction gets revisited. So now, instead of closing the chapter, the response created a new one. A situation where legal pressure, instead of ending speculation, actually intensified it. And that's the pattern that keeps repeating throughout this entire story. Every effort to shut something down seems to pull more attention toward it. Which brings everything back to that original moment again, the unexpected statement, the timing, and the question that still hasn't gone away. Because when a story keeps growing every time someone tries to contain it, people start wondering if there's more behind it than what's already been seen. When you step back and look at everything together, not as separate moments, but as one continuous sequence, the story stops feeling random and starts feeling layered. You have an unexpected public denial from Melania Trump that came before any major public accusation. You have the sudden appearance and disappearance of posts from Angaro just hours before that statement. You have a central figure like Paolo Zampolli connecting multiple timelines, from the modeling world to political circles to individuals linked with Jeffrey Epstein. Then you have conflicting origin stories about something as basic as how Melania and Donald Trump first met, with different accounts pointing in completely different directions. And finally, you have legal pressure that didn't quiet the narrative, but instead gave it more attention and made more people start asking questions. Individually, each of these moments might be explainable. A statement could be precautionary. A document could be misinterpreted. A connection could be coincidental. But when all of them exist together, in the same timeline, it becomes harder to dismiss everything as unrelated. Because the real issue isn't any single claim, it's the accumulation of inconsistencies. It's the fact that key details don't line up cleanly. And when that happens in a story tied to someone as controversial as Epstein, even small gaps start to matter more than usual. Now, to be clear, none of this proves direct involvement, and no verified evidence has established that Melania was part of any wrongdoing connected to Epstein. That distinction matters. But at the same time, unanswered questions don't just disappear, especially when timelines conflict and connections overlap. And that's exactly where this story stands right now, not as a closed case, but as an ongoing puzzle where certain pieces still don't fully fit. Because at the end of the day, the most important question hasn't changed, it's only become sharper. Why make that statement before anyone asked? Was it simply precaution? Was it coincidence with everything that happened the day before? Or was it a moment where something behind the scenes pushed its way into public view earlier than expected? That's what people are still trying to figure out. And until every timeline matches and every version aligns, this is one of those stories that isn't going to fade, it's only going to keep pulling attention back to itself. And now it comes down to you. After everything you've just seen, the timing, the contradictions, the connections, what do you actually believe? Because this isn't one of those stories where everything is neatly explained. The more you look at it, the more questions it creates. So drop your honest opinion in the comments, not what people are saying, not what's trending, what you think is really going on here. If you made it this far, hit that like button, because you already know this isn't the kind of breakdown you see everywhere. And if you want more deep dives that cut through the noise and actually connect the dots, make sure you subscribe and turn notifications on, because the next story might be even bigger than this one. And remember, sometimes the most important part of a story isn't what gets revealed. It's what gets said before it's supposed to.